Good evening all. Fertility work within the Suckler herd is a very broad subject. Nevertheless, establishing this work simply requires a proactive and enthusiastic approach driven by financial gains, hopefully. All farms will have their own unique present management, and one should be stressed right from the beginning. It is not one system fits all approach. One must adapt maybe, but one must realize that all farms are unique entities. However, there are certain facts that are set in stone. For example, the main one, the limiting factor on the efficiency of production is the ability to produce only one calf a year. Now then, you might have a variety of scenarios within different herds for this. You might have a 12-cow herd that produces one calf regularly every month of the year, compared contrastingly with a 12-cow herd that calves down within a very tight, compact, say 9 to 10 weeks period. However, once you've established the protocols, we then move on to maintaining the efficiency of fertility within our Suckler herds. Now, working within fixed parameters, and the main one here, as I've just said, is that you have a gestation period of around 285 days, call it 9 months. You therefore have about 82 days, 3 months, to conceive again. In order to do this, there are certain factors that need to be emphasized and we need to address, and whatever system we have present, these factors are equally important to everybody. I would like to begin by talking about the healthy herd. Living with infection at whatever level cannot be the right approach. We need to try and be as healthy as possible, and by so doing, we then can hopefully achieve what will be a financial enterprise within our Suckler herd. I will name these. The first one that comes to mind is Leptospira, BVD, Neospora, IBR. Those are specifically can cause abortions and can cause fertility-related problems. However, Johne's disease is something that you don't want in the herd, and that in itself will reduce your fertility capacity. And similarly, liver fluke, the fluke affecting liver, one of the essential organs really to work effectively within the fertility parameters, and so forth, rumen fluke.
So, Iwan, in terms of health now, what is the main limiting health issues or that limits fertility within the herd? What was the most substantial ones, and how would you go around tackling those issues?
They're all equally important, beyond really. Like I mentioned, the first ones will cause abortions, either at a later date when the cow is carrying the calf, or as early embryonic deaths, like with BVD. Thankfully, we can monitor these, screen them, and assess the level of infection within your herd. And biosecurity measures, which is not a new term for farmers, when we buy something in, we can assess and know that these animals we buy in are free from these disease. Johne's similarly is an accreditation of on a herd basis, and these things we talk, although we're talking on an individual animal, it is a herd concept at the end of the day. And liver fluke, it's to one's detriment if we don't assess and treat for liver fluke, because it's nigh on impossible to have an efficient working animal, efficient in producing an effective fertility parameters if we are living with liver fluke of any type. And again, that can be monitored quite easily by, well, in numerous ways, by fecal samples being the easiest, really. Then we move on from that to the nutritional management. So you've got a healthy herd.
Yeah, I take it's the influence that feeding has on fertility throughout her gestation period, as well as in that dry period to conceive. The influence is great. How would you go around to manage the feeding regime of animals?
Well, the managing or nutritional feeding management is something that does vary from year to year or within the year, and condition scoring of the animal is something that we should be doing regularly to assess specific targets at specific times, because one has to remember the critical time when the cow is stopped, is being weaned. So we got this transitional period just prior to calving. We need to address that she's not getting too fat, nor is she too thin, because if she's too fat, we'll have later problems with calving. And if she's too thin, then the producing of ovaries, the eggs within the ovary is less, and therefore we get trouble in getting her to conceive at this right time after calving. Post-calving to conception, often cows are low at energy and they require a little bit of an energy boost. The old-fashioned way, we were using sugar beet, not a lot, but at a low dose really, but it was very, very efficient. You could actually split the herd to have preferential treatment for certain groups of cows. For example, these first calvers that will require to still grow and mature during their first and second lactation when they're rearing calves. And they need to be looked after in order to maintain a tight calving pattern and to maintain and to try and reach our fertility goals. And then last but not least, within the nutritional management, one has to take into account your trace element levels within your farm. We're mainly thinking about copper and selenium and iodine. Copper, we know, if you're low in copper, then your cows will be repeating, bulling okay, but will repeat, and therefore maintaining a tight calving pattern is very, very difficult, and that needs to be addressed. And we also know from work done with Farming Connect is the importance of selenium of iodine regarding stillbirths and also the post-calving time where the afterbirth and so forth is cleared out and getting ready to conceive again. So those are the main issues, but condition score is crucial in the daily management really to ensure that these cows are at the peak condition at the correct time.
Obviously feeding has a huge influence on fertility in itself, but it also has an influence on the ease of calving, say the size of the calf. How would you go, what influence would you say that calving ease then has on fertility?
Well, in my opinion, potentially calving ease is the key for your successful fertility regime within the suckler herd. If you don't have an easy calving period, then you're going to have great difficulty in getting your cows to conceive at the correct time. So that's why preparing the cow in terms of condition prior to calving is so important. Breeding for gestation length, I can't see why we need to have an extended gestational period, because we know that calves will grow substantially in the last couple of weeks in utero. And I've yet to see work to show me that big calves end up with big returns. You need calves that calve out quickly and easily and able to be able to suck and have correct colostrum quality and intake to ensure your calf survival rate. And there is even work that I'm involved with where we try and reduce this gestational length by induction, by inducing cows to calve. If we know the dates or the reasonably well. And if we have a quite an accurate method with the farmer of knowing which ones are going to calve when, then you can induce a cow to calve, and that does help to reduce your calving problems. And of course, calving ease, and it's a terrible stress and pressure, extra pressure on the workload of the farmer at that crucial time in production, really. And if it's if you're faced with having calving difficulty, you know, calf after calf being troublesome to calve, then the stress levels gets higher, and unfortunately, it has a direct effect on the finance of your enterprise.
Just a quick question from the floor, Iwan.
Yeah.
If a cow that has twins, what would you recommend management-wise to get the best out of the two calves and then to have the cow returning to the bull within the time frame you want?
Good question. In the ideal world, we need to try and reduce the number of twins in cows, in my opinion. But you've got these twins. Some cows can manage perfectly well. They meet, you know, from the calf point of view and the calf management and survivability of the calves, then we must ensure that they have adequate colostrum. And by that, I mean colostrum from the udder of a cow, that cow or another cow on farm, because the quality of the colostrum intake naturally produced on farm is far superior to anything else. And that can be proved really by taking blood sample up to 6 days after calving. You can calculate by a very simple blood test your colostrum intake and the quality of the colostrum they've had. And actually, you can correlate quite simply the survivability of those calves regarding to the level of colostrum intake from that test. If the question suggests that we split one calf and the cow only rears one, that's a management decision on a unique management decision. I wouldn't like to make a very generalized comment on that. However, it does require that maintenance for that cow is higher, therefore she needs to be treated on a nutritional basis, different to another cow that's only rearing one calf. And we'll come on to fertility soundness now, because often these cows that do rear twins will have uterine problems. They often are slower to involute, have more discharge, more whites, and therefore more problems to conceive.
As you just mentioned, Iwan, I think it's time to move on to fertility soundness checks. Obviously, heat is something very visible in cattle through writing and so on, but fertility isn't necessarily visible. So how would you go at it then to test or check that an animal is fertile from obvious visible factors?
Yeah. Well, it never ceases to surprise me and to amaze me at this particular time, when everybody can think of a calf, whatever size it is, inside this uterus. So you can think of, and we've all seen cesareans, I'm sure, the size of this uterus, and within a short period of time, that huge uterine horn has to contract down, involute down to the size. And if everybody just shows 2 fingers, that's about the width of your uterine horn when the cow is ready to conceive. And that's got to happen within 80 days post-calving. It's quite incredible. And yet cows are genetically able to do this if we actually breed for fertility. So the first thing is to check them at around, say, 30 days post-calving. And from a dairying side, there's a lot of people, they're using the word spooning these days. It's a little tool that they metric check them. They have a little tool that they insert per vagina, and that will give them an indication of the vaginal discharge, which could be coming from the uterus, and whether or not it's dirty and needs to be treated. That's very, very quick, and that's its main advantage. However, if you actually perform an ultrasound examination, which is more tedious, more time consuming, this ultrasound examination can initially examine the ovary. They'll tell you the degree of ovarian activity, suggested anyway. And we've got to remember here that the eggs within that ovary, say 30 to 40 days post-calving, have actually been started before calving in the dry period. And that's why a constant energy increase is so important. So we can assess and examine the ovary, and by simply picking the ovary up, mild, careful digital palpation is known to stimulate ovarian activity as well. Then you go down with the ultrasound to assess the uterine horn. And what we're looking for here initially is the degree of involution. So in other words, has this huge horn contracted down, ready to conceive? And that's quite clear to see. And if it hasn't involuted, it might just be flaccid and big, but the likelihood you will also see inside the lumen, in the uterine horn, infection, pus, and you can see the damage to the endometrium as well. And therefore, that suggests straight away, well, that animal will never conceive in that stage, and we've got to intervene. However, if she has involuted, you might be surprised to see, even at 40, well, certainly at 40 days, even earlier, a bulling string, which tells you, linked with the ova being prepared and ready in the ovary, that this animal actually is starting to consider bulling. Now, prior to that, I'd say day 15 to 20, you could target certain cows, like the twins we were discussing earlier, difficult calvings, those that have retained afterwards, older cows, heifers, first calvers. There is work that suggests that if you inject prostaglandin between 15 and 22 days, that actually will help the sooner conception, the animal to conceive. Obviously, it's a veterinary product, so those animals will have to be presented at that time, but they can be presented in a group. So following on from those post-calving checks, if she's dirty, then obviously she's washed out, antibiotic flush. If there's a lack of involution only, then you can use the prostaglandin at that stage. And you can assess the degree of ovarian activity. And if it's a general suggestion when you're examining these animals that there's a lack of ovarian activity, lack of ovaries being prepared, then you then started to have a discussion on to assess the nutritional and energy imbalance and the condition score of those animals in front of you. I would below, although the textbooks suggest then, and we do it in some places, use hormonal products to stimulate these ovarian activities and to get them bulling. Now, whether or not that is the right way to go about it will be open to discussion. I would like to think that we can develop a very proactive fertility regime within our suckler herd that is more dependent on genetics and the right management rather than dependent on hormonal intervention.
Just a couple more questions from the floor on that topic, Iwan. On inducing cows, as you mentioned earlier, would that lead to any dirty whites problems?
That was how we were taught, and that's how it is some people's opinion. But I've got quite a few now doing it regularly and doing fertility work regularly, and I can assure that from my experience that it does not have any of that problems, because I'll be checking these animals during my post-calving checks, and anything that's been induced will be recorded, because we'll come to the end where we're talking about data collection and so forth. But these cows will, they come to me and they say, yeah, this one induced, there's no difference between that one or another one. And compared induction to a difficult calving, well, the difficult calving will always be the dirty one.
Okay, great. And another question from the floor. What about heifers calving at 24 months? What should we check to see if they are suitable for breeding? I know that we've done some work on this with Farming Connect on a couple of farms on Anglesey last year. And also, what should be done different to the cows within the beef herd on management and weaning to ensure that the bull that they take to the bull the following year?
Okay, if the question doesn't mind, we'll carry on because the answer in those is part of the thing, Bjorn. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
If the questionnaire texts that he wants or she wants to go, I'll answer that specifically. But the work on the heifers is just about a few points ahead. And getting those cows in calf is what will be coming on next, actually.
Okay, we'll move on then to the next question from the floor. Having had a previously tight calving pattern, a bull injury last year resulted in a long spread of calving this year. How would you advise getting back on track to that tight calving pattern?
That's a challenge. Because later on we'll be talking about your heifer management, and I'll be describing that as the fulcrum to your heifer, to your herd fertility. Trying to gain time, you can, and by doing these post-calving checks, that would be the same answer to the previous question, sorry. It's essential to do these post-calving checks. There's no much point in doing them much earlier than 25 to 30 days. But then you can really assess where you are and work on those animals to try and get them bulling by about 40 days, 45 days, and hopefully serve between 45 and 55 days. And that should gain you some time. You will never get back straight away if it's become a real extended. In some incidents, if you're trying to play catch up and concentrating all your efforts on the late ones, you're taking your eye off the ball of the ones that are calved straight away. And sometimes you've actually got to split the herd up to have two calving. Like I said, there's different scenarios. That's why I mentioned the 12 cow scenario, one every month and one in a 9-week period. Well, you could actually have tight blocks like they do in Orkney. And so it's possible, therefore, to really work then on tighter blocks and group of tighter blocks, and then with time bring them together. But just before we go to the bull, because bull problems is a major issue within our suckler suckler herd fertility, and heat detection is essential. Once you've done your post-calving checks, once you've intervened and try and get your cow as fit as possible to ensure that things are working correctly, then heat detection and the ability to perform heat detection is absolutely essential. It's quite clear that it means actually checking your cows many times during the day if you're wanting to be on the ball on it, I'm afraid. There's ways of heat detection. You can chalk them. That doesn't last long. It's not very practical for the suckler herds. Tail paint lasts longer, very practical and relatively cheap. There's ways of actually tail painting, which we won't go into now, but unless there's a question about it, but there's a technique on tail painting. And you can even spend more by putting cameras or various others. But applying these markers, say about 14 days, 10 to 14 days prior to when you're turning the bull or when you're starting AIing, gives you a good enough indication of the rate of bulling. So if you've got 21 cows in your herd, you hope to see on average, 1 cow a day bulling. So during that time, if these cows are bulling, everything is going to plan. If not, then we've got to think, might have a problem. It's also important to collect these data, even at this early days, because by the time you put the bull in, we'll be discussing the bull, return rates is essential to be able to find out if that bull is effective or not. So having data with you, having dates of which cow number 2 was bulled at 2nd of May, you can work out and you can find out, it'll be very useful at a later stage. So that's your heat detection, which leads us then on to Mr. Bull himself. And once we've got a herd that we're happy now, we've prepared them, we know that they're clean, we know that there's ovarian activity there, so they should be ovulating. We've actually got heat detection in for 2 weeks. We know that they're actually bulling quite well. And then the bull goes in. So we expect then immediately to see some bulling activities. The first thing that we must assess is what we call libido of the bull, what I call it plainly working the cows. That bull has to work within the herd of cattle. Fleming response, everybody's seen it, where they turn their upper lip towards their nose. It's a very, very clever way of detecting which cows are on heat, basically. But as they work the cows, you're also assessing their locomotion and ensuring that they're in good condition. But this locomotion assessment is more than simply, they're not lame. They've got to be fit on all 4 feet. And they've also got to be assessed on the ease of back movement, because when they come to serve, the 60% of the weight that's on the foreleg is transferred onto the hind quarters. And that's an enormous amount of pressure. After libido, we then can assess what's produced in the testes. So, as I call it, a biopsy of testicular activity using an electroejaculator procedure. It's a very safe way to collect semen to assess the quality of that semen and what's produced within the testicles. And then finally, the bull has to, in order to conceive, bull has to penetrate properly. Now then, this is easier said than done. We can look and record bulls unable to penetrate, but it's not easy. So this is where recording your bulling data is so important, so that you know what to expect on your repeat rate in 21 days.
So thank you very much, Ewan. So now that we've talked about establishing and realizing that we have heat fertility and there is no issues within the herd, how would you then go on to maintain that the new blood that's raised within the new heifers introduced into the herd, how would you manage them in order to maintain that fertility for the next generations?
Well, part of that is just prior to that, we can also use bulls as sweepers, and that to give the AI for a couple of cycles, 1 cycle or 2 cycles, because that AI potential is to bring in new genetic materials, to answer your question, but specifically on heifer management. Now, like I said prior, this is where your future obviously lies, and this is where there should be a lot of thought into heifer management. And it begins with calf rearing management, because we want to ensure that the heifers reach target weight for bulling at the correct time, and that is regarded now as 65% of mature weight. So in order to do so, these calves have to be born, the colostrum intake, they have to go unchecked so that we can reach this bulling weight at the time, the correct time. We also know that it's not age, but weight that helps maturity of the reproductive tract. And there is work going on, and Farming Connect has been doing some of this work, where we can assess the maturity of the reproductive tract, and we score it simply 3 down to 0. And this will tell, and we tend to examine these at around 14, when the heifers are at 14 months of age, so that we know, we try and pick out and predict which heifers are going to be the most successfully in terms of the fertility. And the work there is mirrored to work done in America, and it's definitely something that should be used, because the ultrasound tool is a useful way to perform this assessment. And in so doing as well, there's a means of measuring the pelvic area, although I tend to measure the pelvic diameter rather than pelvic area, because it's safer, and I think it gives you just as much information. And this hopefully ensures that you're breeding from heifers that will eventually have less calving problems. It's essential when you're dealing with the heifer management that they are either run with a bull or served with AI for a shorter, restricted period compared to your main herd. And we expect heifers to be able to conceive within 2 cycles. And we're therefore hoping that that type of figure, between 85–90% of your heifers, should be able to be in calf within 7 weeks. And that's essential in order to be breeding for fertile animals in the future, which also leads to a longevity factor within your herd.
Before we move on to the next point, Ewan, I've got another question from the floor regarding health. So for how many years after finding a BVD PI in the herd would you advise using the vaccine? And are we safe to keep using the same product, for example, Bovella?
Well, in my opinion, Bovella is the vaccine of choice. To stop vaccination depends on the management and the biosecurity of that herd and the risk element of BVD entering that herd. In my opinion, that risk, whatever it is too high, too great. I would suggest you continue to vaccinate. And I'm also, I'm afraid, a big fan of the tissue tags, because that proves to you that you're actually producing clear, clean calves that are not PI, and therefore you've got no problems within your herd from a fertility point of view.
Great. And another question, at what age would you pelvic measure your females?
Oh, very sorry, I should have said. At about 14 months. The same time as I do the ultrasound maturity examination, we carry out the pelvic measurement at the same time. That's a very good question, because often I'm presented with heifers that are about 20–24 months, and actually there is no data to compare. The data at the moment from America and myself is we're doing it between 12 and 14 months, and it gives quite good data. And it's work in progress, and it's something that I would really like to see much more being done, just because the more data you get, the more accuracy you can do the interpretations.
Thank you very much. So for the past few years, benchmarking has become a very popular topic. So in terms of fertility, what targets and KPIs should farmers be aiming to hit or to achieve within their herd?
Well, this is where we've reached now, Gwion. We've established and we've worked to maintain the work within the herd. Now then, we need to manage now and to continue this good work. And I'm afraid this terrible term that you're born with, but it's been given to me at my age, KPIs, key performance indicators, and blooming targets. But hopefully, even I can see the targets are worthwhile. And these targets, you would expect to have economic implications. And such economic value to the work is essential at the end of the day to have a profitable suckler herd. Because unfortunately, unless we reach or attempt to reach the highest points towards these targets, then it's very, very difficult to say that the venture is economic viable. So the targets, these are high, but these are the targets that is given published by experts in the field. So calvings per cow and heifer put to the bull. So in other words, how many calvings do you get when you turn cows and heifers to the bull? And they expect 95% of them to have calved. Now the lower third, I'm afraid, are around 80, 84. This is UK, not just Welsh figures. Therefore, your barren weight cows would hopefully, from that figure, be no more than about 5%. We will just finish off with discussing compact calving, because by now It's well recognized financially. It's the most important thing, is to try and get this compact calving period because of ease of management, if not anything else. So with cows, we're talking about bulling period of between 9 and 12 weeks, and the heifers, like I said earlier, between 7 and 9 weeks. The shorter your calving period, your bulling period, there is a risk of, if there is a problem, or there is a risk, or if things aren't tight, of having an increased barren rate. So compact calving, now what we expect in the first cycle, 3 weeks, we expect 65% of those cows to have calved. In other words, they've conceived at 65% in the first cycle. Similarly, when you join both 2 cycles together, so in 6 weeks, 2 cycles, this figure of 90% was readily achievable last year. It was a very, very good year last year, but 90% is a challenge, but it's possible. Now, the replacement rate, well, this depends a little bit on the unique management of and decisions on a particular farm. Published figure is less than 50%, but that can vary depending that your replacements, are they, they could be sold off, or you're wanting genetic gain into the herd. So that's discussed, can be discussed. Calf reared, you're expecting calves reared to cows and heifer bulled, you're hoping to get 94%. And the calf mortality, well, you're hoping to have less than that, less than 3%, well, around 1 to 3%. Those are very high, and I wouldn't like to deter anybody or to make people depressed with people trying to hit those type of targets. But those are the type of targets that is achievable with everything going, and that's where we want to try and work hard to see if we can get it. And the calving pattern is one of the main issues with some people, and can be difficult. But it's well known now that getting cows in calf is only one indicator of a herd fertility. A much more accurate measurement of fertility is the number of cows conceived over a short bulling period to achieve a tighter calving pattern. And there are advantages that they say for a calving pattern. Well, you're treating all cows as one from a nutritional point of view. From a health point of view, this reduces the risk of disease spread between older and younger calves. From the herd fertility point of view, the more of them have calved together, it means that they're all more ready to be treated as one animal to be served and conceived by the bull, rather than having a big spread, so that you mean that the later calvers not yet calved when the beginning of the group are conceiving. And also weaning weight and marketing issues become a factor. And not least is labor, coming back to a stressful time of calving and how we need to look after that. So because by extending your mating period, it may give you a false impression because you get more calves. But what you're potentially doing is you're by having a compact calving period, retain less fertile by doing this, sorry, you're retaining less fertile, you're keeping cows that are less fertile, I'm trying to say. A potentially lower conception rate in future, and these same calves are just, we can't get them back. And it's by doing your heifer checks, hopefully it'll complement that this figure becomes lower. And it makes a complicated herd management and increases labor requirement, both of which I think the suckler herd industry can do without.
Great, thank you. And we'll move on to some questions. Feel free, all of you, to ask any questions, just type them into the Q&A icon at the bottom. I've got 3 questions already. So the first question, would using a teaser bull with the heifers be of any gain or help in order to detect heat or fertility within the heifers?
I've got limited experience with teaser bulls. It worked quite well. You've got to be, from a health and safety perspective initially, you've got to be careful with teaser bulls. But it can be useful not to tease them like we tease vasectomized rams within our flock, because there's one big difference between our sheep and cattle. Sheep are seasonal breeders. Cows breed throughout the year. The teaser bull is there to actually identify which cows are bulling as a heat detection more than anything else. It doesn't, in my opinion, although there is work suggesting otherwise, but that it doesn't really stimulate reproductive activity and increase fertility. No.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, do you think hybrid vigor has a part in improving fertility?
Good question. I think every pedigree line will breed has a fertile line. Whether or not that's the most fashionable and the one that people want to breed towards is another question. By having a hybrid vigor, it is known that, again, if the work is done and fertility is bred for that hybrid crossing, then we do know of certain breeds that are not purebreds that have very high successful fertility parameters.
Okay. Another question here. Justifying a bull with a small beef herd is difficult. Not keen on hire due to potential risk of introducing diseases within the herd. What would you recommend on synchronizing cows for AI, and what potential issues could we come across? This will tighten the calving and allow the use of better selected genetics.
Yes, I agree. One thing I forgot to mention, the main aim of synchronization, one of the benefits of synchronization is that in 3 weeks, you actually get 2 chances to serve. Compared if you were doing it naturally, in a 3-week period, you will get 1 service, whereas if you do synchronize, then you can get 2 chances at service. There's a huge, there's a lot of variety of methods, and everybody's got their favorite, I suppose. And I think one needs to discuss with your own vet. There is one that I use quite simply, and synchronization's got to be linked with examination of those animals. People think that just putting a seeder in and everything will work like clockwork, and we serve them today and they're in calf, and then that's the end of it. It doesn't work as quickly and as easy as that, I'm afraid. So yes, a seeder with or without receptor, and definitely with a prostaglandin is one way. And with heifers in particular, it's and cows, it can work very well. The main issue there, I would suggest that you need to scan, ultrasound scan. I forgot to mention the importance of scanning your pregnancy rates. I said it was a rather broad subject. But anyway, you need to scan, and you know, people can scan these days mid-cycle between the first and second repeat. So you've AI'd her, she hasn't come repeating, then 30 to 35 days after that service, you can find out if that animal is in calf or not. And yes, the genetic value of using AI is definitely, it's quite difficult to get as tight a calving pattern as with a bull by doing AI. But usually in a smaller herd, we can get away by just extending that calving pattern to accommodate. That's why I'm saying it's a unique thing.
Thank you. Another question from the floor. Would it be worth tail painting again after 3 cycles or so, 3 or so cycles, to see what hasn't bulled? So going back to your mentioning scanning, would they be able to do so by applying tail paint after the bulls are taken out?
Well, you can, yes, although I would suggest I would scan them a month after taking the bull out. So you can bull them, you can paint them after taking the bull out, and you don't want to play too much with them by painting them in the cycle. The paint doesn't last as long these days as it used to for some reason, but it gives you good indication in that first 3-week cycle which cows are actually bulling, so that you've got a cycle date to them. Yes, painting them after taking the bull out is a very good idea, and then to link that or to accommodate or to add on to that, I would suggest you definitely scan your cows.
Okay, thank you. I've only got one question left from the floor, so if any of you have a question, please ask it now. So the last question I have is, after the cows have calved, when would be the best time to put the bull in the field with the cows and calves to retain that tight calving system? Or is it leaving the bull with the cows all year round okay?
No, as I said earlier, I think it's very important that you examine post-calving to ensure that everything's okay. So the cows are having definitely no bull to them until 50 days post-calving. And then you're running this bull for a specific time, no longer than 12 weeks, in my opinion, in order to get a tight calving. Yes, you could argue merits on keeping a bull with them all year round and getting a calf eventually, but that's not the benefits of what I was trying to say, the advantages of a compact, tight calving pattern.